It's the 18th of February 2024. It's 5 AM and the sun is still well below the horizon, and waiting to start the race from 4th position in 45 minutes time is car 912, a Porsche 992 GT3R, entered by the legendary Porsche race team Manthey Racing. Today, it's set to be driven by a highly experienced, all-platinum rated crew, all of whom are factory drivers, specifically Matt Campbell, Ayhan Kanguven and Lawrence Vantour. Behind the 912 is the car that won the race last year, car 75, a Mercedes-AMG GT3 Evo, driven by bronze-rated Kenny Habul, an amateur driver and the team owner, and two platinum-rated pros, Lukas Stoltz and Jules Gounod. They were ready for the race because what's about to happen is one of the most exciting races in the world, the Bathurst 12 Hour. As cold as the previous year, there was light fog across the mountain, meaning a safety car start. The race got underway with a single file start with 11 hours and 45 on the clock. This gave the race a more calm opening sequence as cars weren't piling into turn 1 side by side. Car 75 was entered by Sun Energy 1 Racing, the previous year's winner. I made a video about that race too, as well as this design that you can buy from the link in the pinned comment, as well as the design for this video. This car was an owner-driver, true privateer team. This meant they'd have to drive part of the race with an amateur driver in the car, and although Kenny Habul is one of the best amateur racing drivers in the world, he is still an amateur at the end of the day, and that compromises the team's strategy. During the opening hour, the drivers remained cautious, especially given the dark conditions, but as the sun came up, so did the action. With an hour and 12 minutes past, the first pit stops happened. The leader, car 32, WRT's BMW, came in first. Sheldon van der Linde got out and Charles Weerts got in. The next lap, a whole load of cars came in, including the number 46, but the tyres were taking longer to warm up in the cold morning. The cars that pitted earlier were slow on the outlaps, which allowed the 46 to jump the 32. They caught a bit of traffic, and this allowed Weerts to have a look and try a move on Valentino Rossi, but it didn't work. They were slowing each other down massively now. The two Porsches, on the other hand, 912 and 911, still hadn't stopped. The 911 is very fuel efficient. Both cars came in and filled the tank with petrol, and as they came out, they remained in the lead of the race, with car 912 driven by Ayhan Kanguven in front. Car 911 was the older 991 generation, and it was in the Pro-Am class, now driven by bronze-rated Yasser Shahin, and it was easily passed by the pros, but the 912 kept its lead and began pulling away. With 912 disappearing down the road and out of sight, attention can be turned back to car 75, Sun Energy 1 Racing. In all of this, it managed to move up to third in the pits, and now driven by Jules Gounod. David Reynolds was now the cork in the bottle, and developing a train of cars behind him. At the head of the queue of cars was Jules Gounod. But he just couldn't find a way past his fellow AMG driver, so instead decided to just pit early. But a disaster would unfold in the pits. The driver change was slower than expected, and the pit stop was over 100 seconds, 20 seconds slower than the rest of the competition.
It had a bit of back dramas from that crash last year. How's the body holding up, and will you get back in the car later today?
Mate, it's a shit show. It's more dramas than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, I'll tell you.
They dropped to 6th place from the pit stops, with Kenny Habul getting in the car. The experienced bronze-rated driver would do his best to hold up the 77 Mercedes and the 13 Porsche for as long as he possibly could, keeping the pro drivers behind him for several laps, but eventually they both managed an overtake. Not that you'd know it if you're watching on TV, because the TV director was too busy showing a replay of a Mercedes GT4 car going over some grass. Shortly after this, the invitational class Vortex V8 decided it wanted to try a bit of reversing, but evidently the experimental sports car was less stable in reverse and ended up stuck in the gravel trap, leading the race director to deploy the safety car. This gave livestream viewers the perfect opportunity to appreciate the design of the BMW XM, as evidenced by these live chat messages. The XM truly shows that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and quite clearly the beholders were unable to keep their breakfast down at the sight of this tractor. But eventually, the spectators could take their blindfolds off because the safety car was set to pull into the pit lane where it could be hidden from view where it belongs. The lack of the wave by as the third hour wasn't complete meant the pack spread out quite quickly, divided by the lap cars, but as it turns out, other teams decided they liked what Kenny Habul did in 2023, and they entered their own driver lineups using what became known as the Kenny rule, and the 22 Audi behind had already completed their bronze stint with Liam Talbot at the wheel, and now Audi's factory driver Chris Meese was closing up to Kenny Habul, and it was looking dire for 75. Meanwhile, the 912 was pulling away in the lead once again. The 911 is a particularly fast car on race pace due to being so lightweight. With the lead he was pulling, the last thing Manthey EMA needed was another safety car. Speaking of which, that Mustang's front end has evidently had some mid-lap readjustments, which means the viewers would now have to endure another 15 minutes of being forced to look at the BMW Cybertruck. The top three came into the pits, leaving the 22 Audi and 75 Mercedes out on track, the 22 having overtaken Sun Energy 1 somewhere in all of that. These two cars, in an act of strategic genius, decided to come into the pits only after a few laps of safety car when the field had already been bunched up for some reason, dropping huge track position. Lucas Stoltz got in, Kenny Habul got out, but he was all the way down in 10th position. The safety car came in and Matt Campbell in 912 pulled away effortlessly once more. That 911 was incredible in race conditions. But after just a few minutes, 912's teammate in the Pro-Am class got hit into the gravel trap, meaning this stupid thing was wheeled back out onto the track. The TV director made his first good decision of the race, only picking the camera angles where the safety car wasn't visible to save the TV viewers' eyes, although I was watching trackside, which meant that there was no hiding from the BMW XM whenever it came around. But eventually, the safety car came back in, the lapped cars were waved by, and now the field was closed up once again. The race restarted, and once again the Manthey Racing Porsche pulled out a big gap. And finally, after 4¼ hours of flat-out actions, the race began to calm down. That was until Charles Viets decided to try out skateboarding, crashing into a barrier with an ad for a better car than the one he's driving, and leading to the safety pig being deployed once again. Bathurst is a tough track, and that makes it a safety car factory. The pit stops behind the safety car saw the 75 dropped into 11th position, and once the safety car came back in, Lawrence Vanthoor didn't drop the field this time. It took nearly half an hour for Valentino Rossi to finally fall out of touch with a Porsche ahead. Meanwhile, Jules Gounod was catching up to Felipe Fraga in the Group M Mercedes, but just as he was looking ready for a move, the Ginetta decided to park there, and this brought out yet another safety tractor. It was now when dark clouds began to move over the track. And what's about to happen is going to be one of the craziest turn of events that I've seen for a single car in a race over such a short period of time ever before. Eventually, the safety pig came back into the pit lane, and now we can finally have some green flag running after the constant safety car interruptions. There's been so many safety cars in this race so far that I'm even running out of insults for the BMW XM. I didn't know that was possible. At this point in the race, the most annoying thing possible would be yet another safety car. Oh, for fuck. The safety car was deployed yet again, and right as the safety car came out on track, the rain came down. This was seriously wet weather, accompanied by lightning. At the track, we were given warnings on all the screens about a severe thunderstorm in the area, advising us to find cover. But in all the pit stops and carnage, car 75 dropped to 12th position. Once again, 912 pulled out a big lead over his fellow Porsche once the safety car came back in on the first lap of green flag, proving that it wasn't just BOP, but a well set up car with good drivers that made the 912 so fast. But bad news finally came to Manthey Racing. They had a drive-through penalty. They made a pit stop breach. A lap later, Paul Tracy hit the wall, pushing the splitter back into the front wheels and locking them in place, which unsurprisingly brought out the safety car for the 807th time this race. right before the 912 came into the pit lane to serve the drive-through penalty, dropping him to 6th place. But even worse news came. Since it was under safety car conditions, race control informed Manthey Racing that Campbell's drive-through did not count and he would have to serve it again under green flag conditions. Bastian Boos in the 13 Porsche was now leading, and Luca Stolz somehow got up to 8th place in all of that. Campbell served the drive-through as soon as possible. With the 912 effectively out of the picture, the focus can be turned back on to 75. Luca Stolz was making up time in the wet, and now he was catching up to the car 911, the Pro-Am class car from Manthey Racing, being driven by pro driver Alessio Picariello. The track was drying out quickly thanks to the Crowns Road and hot temperatures, and there were questions over when to put the slicks on. Luca Stolz would find himself in an incredible side-by-side battle with the 911 and the 130 Grupper M car. The 911 would look this way and that, but Maro Engel was having none of it. He was driving the widest Mercedes ever, and this gave Luca Stolz the chance to have the look on Alessio Picariello. But Picariello was wise to the Mercedes in the mirrors. Eventually, Picariello pulled off a daring overtake, all the way around the outside of Griffin's Bend, and Stolz tried to follow him through, but Engel decided he wouldn't be having that. The following lap, Stolz tried Picariello's move, squeezing Engel down to the inside on Mountain Straight. They touched, and then they touched again, the pair of cars dancing around on incredibly worn-out wet tyres, only to be broken up when Maro Engel came in for slicks. Hello there, Grello. As the cars came out of the pits on slicks, the number 10 Mercedes C63 locked up on a wet patch and went into the wall at Griffin's Bend, leading to the third time this specific car has caused a safety car period. At this point, if I were the marshals, I'd just stop recovering that car back to the pits to limit any further carnage it could cause. Meanwhile, somehow in all of this, the Pro-Am class car, 911, the older 991 generation car from Manthey EMA, somehow got to the lead. Being a Pro-Am class car rather than a Kenny-ruled pro car with an AM driver, Yasser Shahin had to drive the car yet again. As the safety car came in, the leading Manthey EMA 911 was quickly passed by Jackson Evans, whose name is spelt wrong, in the number 13 Porsche 911, and now the amateur Yasser Shahin was holding up the pack. Carnage unfolded across the track as pro drivers were eager to find their way past the slower 911. Then, the following lap, the rain came back big time, with everyone on slicks, and this was great news for one competitor, the 912. The cars are BOP'd for dry conditions. In the wet, strong wet weather cars will have more outright performance because the BOP doesn't include wet weather, and the 911 is perfect in the wet. But why is the 911 so good in the wet? Let's have a look at it. The Porsche 911 is famous for being rear-engined, so it's got a lot of weight on the rear. The more weight you add to a given axle, the more force it takes to move that across the surface of the tarmac, meaning technically more grip. However, you also add lateral inertia to that axle, as the weight wants to push the rear outwards as the car corners, and this happens at a 1-to-1 ratio. But there's a third factor which actually makes it less than 1-to-1. Tyre load sensitivity. As you add weight onto tyres, they compress and stretch and begin to produce less coefficient of friction. So for each kilogram of weight you put on the rear, the extra grip you get never overcomes the extra lateral inertia you gain from that weight. Looking at the opposite end of the car though, the front has very little weight on it, so there's very little lateral inertia and tyre load sensitivity, so the front end turns in better than the rear, and this is known as oversteer. But usually oversteery cars are terrible at putting power down without spinning the wheels. But the 911 has an ace up its sleeve. Grip goes in two directions, lateral and longitudinal. In the lateral direction, the 911 is rear limited. But the longitudinal inertia is not affected by where you put the weight of the car in the longitudinal direction. And so the car has the same amount of inertia to overcome to accelerate or brake regardless of its longitudinal weight distribution. But it's rear-wheel drive, so only the rear wheels have to grip to put power down, and the weight is on those rear wheels, meaning they have lots and lots of pressure on them without any adverse inertial effects, giving the 911 fantastic rear-end grip in the longitudinal direction and great front end in the lateral direction. It also means that the weight is perfectly balanced under braking as weight transfers towards the front-on brakes. But the natural rear distribution makes a perfect balance for this whilst braking. The result is a car that has great straight-line acceleration, a really strong front end, whilst being rear-wheel drive and having great braking. This is also why teams love aerodynamic downforce, as it carries no lateral inertia penalty, so you just get the grip from the extra pressure on the tyres. All of that makes what's about to happen make a whole lot more sense. At McPhillamy Park, Matt Campbell was in 8th. By Skyline, he was in 7th. And on the exit of Forest Elbow, he overtook the Group M Mercedes and climbed up to 6th position. And then, they all dived for the pits, all taking tyres only. This was going to be a battle of whose pit crew could change tyres the fastest, and by the end of the stops, the answer was revealed. It was Manthey Racing. Matt Campbell was now in 2nd place, but the storm looked to be quite a small, powerful storm. It was about to dry out despite how heavy the rain was at that moment, and car 222, an all-Aussie lineup being driven by Cam Waters at the time, was leading. At the top of the mountain, he had a 38-second lead. He hadn't come into the pits, he was on slicks, but conditions were practically undrivable. By the time he reached Forest's Elbow, his lead was slashed to 28 seconds. Campbell was 10 seconds per sector faster. By the end of Conrod Straight, it was 19 seconds. He had to pit. Campbell now had a 4-second lead over Maxi Götz. This has to be one of the most wild turns of events I've seen for a single car in a race over such a short time before. He went from leading to being down in 15th after a drive-through penalty and then suddenly launched back into the lead. An incredible turn of events for 912. But the rain was getting even heavier. The inevitable happened. Jacques Lebrock lost the car in a straight line due to aquaplaning, and usually the rule of thumb is when it's wet enough for cars to lose it in a straight line, it's wet enough for the safety car to be deployed. After a long interruption, the track was drying out, and this meant the safety abomination can come back to the pits. And out of Hell Corner, Jules Gounod got a great exit and passed Felipe Fraga's Mercedes down Mountain Straight, and now he was on the back of Maxi Götz's 2nd place AMG, and they began to engage in a fierce battle for 2nd place. Gounod tried to get a better exit from Hell Corner by taking the outside line on the way in, but Götz squeezed him out on the entry, seeing what he was trying to do. The two Mercs were battling hard, and this was great news for the 912. Finally, after all of this, the race started to calm down. Car 912 was not running low on fuel, but maximum continuous driver time for Matt Campbell was on its limit, so they had to stop first when they were early. Once the 75 did its stop, it actually came out in front as the 912 lost time on cold tyres out of the pits, but very quickly Hakan Guven overtook Lukas Stoltz and then Maxi Götz. But some debris was dropped on track, and the full course yellow commenced despite what the TV director is trying to tell you. This allowed the 222 car that briefly led earlier on slicks in the wet to pit under full course yellow conditions and come out ahead of the 912 as the race went back to green flag. The 222 led by 10.6 seconds, but Guven was taking a second a lap out of him, and it wouldn't take long for Guven to catch Randall in the 222, overtaking him down the straight using the help of his lap teammate for slipstream. The next stint was rather more straightforward for the 912, which came in and out without a loss of position. Jules Gounod was in 2nd in the Sun Energy 1 car with just over 45 minutes left, and the track was drying out. The cars had all switched back to slicks, so the Porsche's advantage was gone. They were now back to equal performance. Matt Campbell was back in the car with a 12-second lead. The only way Manthey Racing could really lose this race was if one of their drivers made a mistake or an amateur driver did something stupid to bring the safety car out and close the gap between Campbell and Gounod.
Straight, and is he going to try and flick turn it? He won't have enough lock. Oh, put your foot down, you would have made that there.
If it doesn't bottom out here.
It's exactly what's happened.
When the safety car came back in, for one of the only ever times in the race, the 912 didn't easily pull away from the field. Gounod went with him and stuck with him, and he even had a look down the inside on Mountain Straight. The Mercedes is more powerful, perfect for overtaking, but as the Porsche got to the top of the mountain, it finally started to pull away. With 5 minutes left, Campbell extended the lead to over 6 seconds, and Gunnar was having to look in his mirrors for the Audi of Chris Haase, but with 1 minute left on the clock, Gunnar started closing in massively. The gap dropped massively as the clouds were clearing and the sun was coming back in the sky. The sun was coming back on the racetrack too. Sun Energy 1, to be precise, was that sun. By the time Campbell crossed the line to start the final lap of the race, the gap was 3.6 seconds. And by the top of the mountain, it was down to 2.7 seconds. The sun was catching the 911. But by the end of the lap, it wasn't enough. Matt Campbell crossed the line to win the 2024 Bathurst 12 Hour. This is when Porsche raced against the sun and won.